sometimes one gets comfortable in one's discomfort. Do you know what I mean? Okay, it's not great here, but oh, good Lord, what if I go out of the frying pan into the fire? Heaven forbid.
Risk is not about the result. You know, we talk about results. We always want the best results. But if you don't get the result you want, let's say an experiment you plan, and the result turns out to be the opposite, maybe it disproves your theory. It doesn't mean that that you didn't do the right thing. So there's a whole process of thinking about risk in the terms of, if I'm doing all the right things, it's really not about success or failure. It's really about my own success.
Risk is a very personal thing. So, you know, there are things that people think I do that are very risky and that for me don't feel so risky. Part of it depends on your personal circumstance. So risk can put your job, can be putting your job at risk, feeling that you're doing something that's job limiting or career limiting, or potentially put your salary at risk. You know, I've been lucky enough in situations, it hasn't happened too often that I've had to get into that situation. For me, risk is more about putting my sense of purpose at risk. You know, it's about, am I taking on something that's going to make me feel like a failure or feel that I'm not being true to myself? And that's the kind of risk I worry most about.
There was one time when I took the wrong job. I took a job that wasn't, the fit wasn't there. It wasn't there.
I thought it was, you know, the right thing to do, put me on the fast track. It was a job that never had another woman in it before. And this was back decades ago when I was at Digital Equipment Corporation. I thought, oh, it was going to be great to be the first one. But it wasn't something I was passionate about, you know, and I went to it and I hated it.
And I had made a move, a move from one city to the other, taking that job.
And I was thinking, how did I get myself into this role? What did I ever do? What was I thinking? Why did I ever think I could do this job? You know, the continual self-doubt, you know, maybe the first week on the job.
And it took me so long to admit that I hated it because I felt like a failure.
And, you know, you kind of say, okay, you know, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I can fail and I go back to doing what I'm doing, what I was doing before this job.
It took me a couple of years to realize that. And that was not easy. I could have just keep on going on. Oh, what can I do? Oh, woe is me. Oh, why me? It happened to me. Or I could get up and, okay, this is not working and I need to make a change. And I did the latter.
I actually went back to the job I had been before, and I had people asking me, you know, why'd you come back? Did you fail? What was wrong with it? And I had to come to terms with that on a personal level, to say it wasn't a failure because I learned from it. I learned that I need to follow my passion and I have to follow my gut. And like a lot of women in technology, I think I'm not very good at listening to my gut. I was just talking to a dear friend about this, about decision making. You know, we're really good at analytics and we're really good at data. And I make lists, you know, pros and cons, and try to decide. But sometimes at the end of the day, you really need to listen to your gut. And I've tried to learn some techniques to do that. And then the hardest part has been trying to learn to trust myself. So I think it's about, first of all, figuring out why you think something is a risk, right? And then convincing yourself that you're being true to yourself makes it possible to take almost any risk, because you know that you did the right thing for yourself, whatever happens.
Sometimes the risk is outside your own control. For example, if you think about the financial crisis of the last 2 years, you know, if you tried to start a new business in that time and failed, it might not have been because of what you did. It might have been of the external markets that really, you know, caused you to fail. So I think you have to understand what were the causes of failure. If it was a bad decision on my part, then, you know, maybe it wasn't a good move. But if I made the right decisions, if I had the right support and it didn't work, then you have to look outside and say, well, you know, was there market factors? Was it not ready? Was the technology before its time? And kind of look at how you might step back and apply what you've learned to, you know, a different venture, but not give up the fact that you should still take the risks.
If you take a risk and everybody agrees it's not taking a risk, it's consensus, which means it's too late. because risk is, if you have to be ahead of the curve.
The companies that allow you to fail are the ones that are winning, quite frankly. Otherwise, they're not embracing change.
Successful entrepreneurs typically have failed 1 or 2 or 3 times before they end up with a successful venture. And I think we need to allow for that in the business world. We need to allow for the small failures so that people can grow, so that they will attempt to take risks.
It brings me back to a time when I was at Hewlett-Packard. I came in as a technical person, and I led the development team for software development in the Unix lab for HP. And the more I thought about how software was changing the dimensions of the company, the more I felt that we could improve it if we knew how to run it as a business. Software was always this group that was down at the end of the hall behind some corner, and it was a product that was added in, and it was mysterious, and nobody knew how to deal with the geeks. And in reality, it was really an opportunity for growth. It was the opportunity for new business, and people needed to think differently. So as I watched the business of software start to change, I thought we really ought to run it as a business. And that meant for me, though, I needed more business vocabulary. And at the time, Hewlett-Packard was only funding engineering degrees. I took it upon myself to create a proposal that I was going to give to John Young, who was the CEO at that time. And it took a lot of courage, because I'd only seen him in meetings where I had to get a proposal approved. And I knew he could ask really tough questions, but I thought I'd figure out a way to cope with that. So I called up his secretary and said, I'd like an appointment. I only want it to be 30 minutes, but since I knew his secretary, I said, I really would like an extra 30 minutes behind if he likes what we're talking about. So I developed this proposal that I decided I would take to John Young. And what I did was I created a barometer. And I developed why HP needed to think about the business of software as opposed to saying, I wanted an MBA. When I first walked into his office, my hands were shaking, but he couldn't see that because I was holding something. My knees were shaking, but I sat down quickly. And I talked to him just one-on-one. And then I brought up the proposal. And I told him that I understood that our HR policies were not to fund MBAs. However, here's what I was convinced of. And I gave him statistics. I gave him issues. I gave him facts for HP in terms of the growth of the business versus the growth of the hardware side of the business, and where it was coming principally from the software side. And after 30 minutes, I stopped. And I said, okay, I promised you 30 minutes. And I showed him my barometer, and I said, this is what I'm looking at, and I know we don't do this, but if there's a way that we can at least partially cover my costs. And he looked at me, and he looked at the front. Big silence for a few minutes, and I'm going, oh gosh, I've shot my career right here. And I sat there still firm and convinced of what I was doing. And he looked at me and he says, well, I think we can do this, and I think we can fund the whole thing. Clearly you've thought about it. It's a good proposal. I expect you to stay for 2 years after you get the degree and add the value that you're talking about. And if you'll do that, I'll do this. So I got to keep my car, keep my secretary, keep my office, and I went off to Stanford, got my degree, and came back, and I ran the software initiative for HP. And John learned a lot about software. So he felt that he'd gotten more than his money's worth out of it. And it all started with this, I think I'm going to go talk to John Young about this, because I kept getting no from the HR folks. Not that they're bad. I love some of my best HR buddies out there, but there are times when you just have to push the system and try something, a different path. And it's okay to try. You know, what's the worst he was going to say? No. And then you just decide what the consequences of that are. So for young people coming up, because the world is changing, because there's so many new technologies and new things to know and understand, staying in tune with how you learn and how you follow through on things is very important. And finding ways to give value back for the value you receive is equally important.